show is going to be delayed. I need to tell everyone, and hopefully all of you will be able to join him. We're going to push his show back an hour today, although we'll have to see how that goes. But in general, he should be starting perhaps an hour later, simply because we're having some glitches in terms of daylight savings time, and my guess, we're going on California time. So it's just sort of the wilds of radio at the moment I think we're experiencing here. I do want to say that I am hoping to get a new interview with Aaron McCullum very shortly. I've got a lot of people writing in and asking when will that interview
not only the connection to all of the events happening to our solar system galaxy, but also technically, geopolitically, and in terms of consciousness and spirituality. Welcome to the program, Carrie.
Thank you. We're doing a very unusual thing, a link up of two radio shows simultaneously here. So I think our listeners are getting sort of an interesting composite of two shows and two styles, and plus we have another guest. And would you introduce the professor?
Yeah, Professor Jeff Grupp, of course, is the author of Corporatism, which is probably the best book, I believe, in terms of the corporate elite, in terms of what's happening to the planet, in terms of the corporatism, which is the driving force now economically, geopolitically in the world, that controls the governments of the planet. And also his book, Telescreen and Telementation, which deals with consciousness and the fact that we are the co-authors of our own future timeline. So Professor Grupp, who's here every Friday, he has a new DVD out now that the Illuminati are the Nephilim, and it explains in technically and academically, in a rigorous deductive and inductive logic way, how these things can be provable. So welcome back, Jeff.
Hey, it's great to be here with you and the Project Camelot crew today, Dr. Bill.
There's a couple of areas, and of course I don't want to belabor too long, but I found a new analogy to explain, and I'd like to get your reflections both from Carrie and yourself. If you look at, when I used to live in Georgia in 87, 88, one of the delicacies down there was peaches. Of course, it's the peach state. That's one of their their state fruits is peaches, which are really good in Georgia, by the way. And one of the things you can do with them is you can steam them. And if you steam a peach, it's the best way to describe the crust of the earth, where you steam them and then the skin will slide. In fact, you don't even need to change the look of the peach. If you steam it lightly, you can simply slide the skin around without ever taking off or doing anything. Well, that's what happens. Right now, the earth is having a movement, usually before about 1997, it was moving around 10 kilometers per year. Relatively slow. It's actually sped up to around 40 plus kilometers per year, around 41 to 43 kilometers per year, which is pretty fast since 1997. And the North Magnetic Pole is moving toward Russia, towards Siberia. That, of course, means that the inside mechanism that drives the giant rivers of magma moving under the crust are actually moving. So the inside, like of the peach, is actually moving in a direction away from the spinning crust of the earth, which is spinning in a specific angle, around 23.5 degrees tilt, as it spins around the sun. And of course, what that means is that at some point, these forces are being impinged on the tectonic plates, which is why we're seeing an increase in earthquakes, like the one here in Southern California that struck Calexico on the U.S. side in Mexicali. $100 million damaged all the way into the Imperial Valley, 120 miles east of San Diego. Earthquakes all over the place from just a day or two later, 7.7 on the Isle of Java. Much farther south, east of the big Aceh December 26th earthquake. Major earthquakes all over the planet, around the Ring of Fire tectonic plate, and other areas around the world. These are all earth changes as well. And of course, I posted up a few links. NASA is predicting a sun pole shift. Of course, that happens every 11 years, where the sun flips its magnetic poles, but there's an interlocking. What's going on is the Earth's magnetic poles shift roughly 11,600, 700 years after three passages through the galactic plane. And we're actually starting that process already, where the North Pole, there's an area of the North Pole near the North Atlantic that's already become South Pole in terms of its polarity. And in the South Atlantic, near the Ross Ice Shelf, there's actually a switch where it's actually North Pole. So if you look at your compass and your ship is in that area of the world, strangely enough, your compass is doing all kinds of funky things right now. That means that we're due for major increases in earthquakes. The magnetic flux field's down, even if there's no solar mass ejection, even if you don't postulate a dwarf star coming in below the ecliptic, below the galactic plane, solar plane of our solar system, that, along with just normal sunspot activity, which is going to be very active in the latter part of cycle 24, we're likely to see major failure of crops and major effects of increased ultraviolet radiation on the living things on this planet, which is why the globalists are preparing underground bunkers and bases, off-world space platforms, their colony on Mars, and of course mining operations, etc., on the moon. And so there's in a sense, a parallel, if you want to call it society, a technological society that has been running since literally after Second World War, that has increasingly separated itself from the political and life of the planet. So I'd like to hear your comments, Carrie, because you've been doing a lot of research and travel. I'm sure you get similar messages from other experts, and as you collect it together, you can kind of filter through what makes sense and what doesn't. What do you think of this kind of metaphor of the steamed peaches?
Well, that's an interesting approach, I have to say. It may be fairly accurate. I have to say that I am not a scientist, so I am not really familiar with what is going on literally to the crust of the Earth at this time, other than to say that the Ring of Fire is definitely showing a renewed activity. And I have had my own premonitions of a major earthquake, at least in the LA area. And we already had one sort of precursor, which was centered down in Baja, which was Sunday, I guess it was.
Right, yes, in the afternoon.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and so I did tap into that on a psychic level. I happened to be actually talking to a friend about it, and it did make me ill. Major earthquakes and sometimes major events will make me ill prior to them actually hitting. Once they hit, I'm usually fine, which is interesting. Yeah. I think my body seems to pick up the rising tension that hits the Earth when any event that's really massive comes along. Right. But and that will be true of a lot of intuitives out there. But in terms of what you're saying, that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, but the thing, I guess the important point is, and I posted up a number of sites, both NASA and metaphysical, and if you actually look at the referenced literature, there's enough evidence now that a lot of this can't be disposed of and put on what I call the shelf of being kind of like way out there, when we have, like the NASA, put 5 satellites through the magnetosphere and showed that it was a hole 4 times the size of the diameter of Earth at 20,000 miles out. When we look at the evidence now that we're expecting solar cycle 24 with the SOHO and the other sun observatory satellites, etc. This is public information. When you collect it together, you realize, along with the geopolitical issues like the building of massive underground facilities that are being built in the Ural Mountains going back many years, going back decades, that the globalists are fully available and understand this, and they're preparing to have a new order, which is an order of the new world. In other words, they expect some kind of cataclysm, and they're preparing for it so that they will then continue civilization, and at least their version of it, after the cataclysm. And unfortunately, they're not preparing the population for what could be coming, at the very least, a failure of crops and a collapse of a lot of the microchips and power networks, the distribution networks. Those things alone could crash the first world nations. The third world may not notice if they have, iron cookware and they eat from coconuts and they fish locally, but first world might have some problems. When we come back, we're going to ask more questions too of Professor Krupp, and of course we'll probably continue in ArgusoogRadio in the Netherlands. Professor Krupp, I'd like to hear your comments too. Come right back in, and Carrie Cassidy, really appreciate it at ProjectCamelot. Back in a moment.
I am not sure. I think we just lost them. So I just want to alert my radio technicians on the other side there. And at the same time, we're also getting reports of an error on the website of ArgusoogRadio, and I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but at any rate, it looks like the link is having trouble connecting, and so it's possible their servers are being attacked. Maybe we just have an overload in terms of listeners.